Hey, welcome back to Blind Life Talks, or should I say hashtag Blind Life Talks. I'm your host Pranav, aka Phoenix, and I've got back with me Abhishek Dole. Hi, Abhishek.
Hi Pranav, it's great to be with you again, and thanks for having me back a second time. I personally would have believed that once would have been a good enough dosage, but I am glad to hear that I was wrong.
Yeah, indeed. Our viewers enjoyed your company. I really enjoyed your company, and I'm glad to have you back. So today we're actually going to be talking about another topic, which is a little more down my lane, to be honest, as a tech enthusiast, which is digital accessibility. But before we go there, for those who haven't watched the previous video, Abhishek, could you probably introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. As Pranav said, my name is Abhishek Dhol. I'm currently a 19-year-old law student. I'm studying my undergraduate law degree, Bachelor's of Law, at Queen Mary University of London in London, England, UK. I will be beginning my second year in September of 2022. I'm currently interning at the Freedom Law Clinic, a UK-based charity which focuses on miscarriage of criminal justice cases and pro bono, as in free representation for human rights and civil liberties cases. So yeah, and I have, as for my blindness, as you will see, if you're a sighted viewer, I am blind, like Pranav. Though the conditions we have are different, mine is called retinopathy of prematurity, ROP.
All right, thanks, Abhishek. That was way better than I could have done, to be honest. um, so today we're going to talk about digital accessibility, as I said, and we're going to go over some things like what is digital accessibility, or what comprises as digital accessibility. What does it encompass? What does it not encompass? In the sense is what is digital inaccessibility?
Yes.
Um, we're going to try to clarify some myths about digital accessibility.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about some of the tips that we have to make your content align better with
Yes.
digital accessibility.
Yes.
Uh, and through all of this, we're talking through experience, really. Um, and all of this is from experience. None of it, well, some of it is from reading, to be honest, but reading after experience. So
Yes.
I hope you guys have fun and also take something away from this. That's the primary goal. Um, so let's actually start by how we actually got interested to make this second Blind Life Talks video. This was actually an experience that Abhishek had. And Abhishek, probably you can just go into it in more detail, I guess.
Yes. Um, I should mention that, like Pranav, I am an Indian citizen, and as a quick piece of background, I did my 10th and 12th grade boards from an Indian school. So what that means is during my vacations, my vacations from law school, I return to India every year, and this was, of course, the first time, and this will continue. So I returned from the UK in June, and if any of you have any questions, I'm doing my internship with the Freedom Law Clinic virtually now. But uh, shortly after I returned from the UK, I realized that I needed an Indian SIM card because my UK SIM card was my UK attempting to use my UK phone number was causing certain difficulties as my UK phone provider O2 does not have a tariff for India, which means that if an O2 customer were to go to India and make calls there either to India or UK numbers, um, there would be standard international call charge rates applied, which would be 402 pound to a minute. which in Indian currency is 200 rupees a minute. So, obviously, the only alternative I would have had if I did not get an Indian SIM card would have been to keep my phone on Wi-Fi and airplane mode for most of the day, which was a bit difficult, especially as I was going out to meet various people, especially in the beginning, such as teachers from my school, some Indian friends of mine from law school, etc. So I went to Airtel to purchase an Indian SIM card. And what happened is, I was informed that I went to Airtel with my father on a pretty rainy Thursday evening towards mid-July, and what we were told in the store is that I would have to comply with Airtel's security procedure. I would need to do what is known as an iris scan. Now, for various medical reasons, my right eye is smaller than my left, um, and the sorry, I misdescribed what they asked me to do. I they said that to comply with their security procedures, to have a proper identifying biometric, they need me to perform a blinking motion with my eye. Now, because my right eye is smaller than my left, it is much more difficult to make out whether the it's doing the blinking motion or not. Now, how did they get around that obstacle? As my dad was with me, they told him, "Look, sir, just take his SIM in your name." As in, they told my dad to take the SIM that I would be using while I was in India in his name. Um, uh, and that was what and that is what has been done, because they could not provide an Airtel, from whom we got the SIM, could not provide any alternative solution. And Airtel, for non-Indian viewers, is one of our biggest phone providers in this country, as popular as, let's say, BT, EE, or Vodafone in Britain. So yeah, now let's get something straight here, and I'm quickly coming to the conclusion of the account of the incident, which has sparked our interest in making this video. The only country in which I have a functioning phone system in my own name is the UK, which is a country of which I'm not a citizen and not a passport holder of. In my own country, I have been born and brought up, I don't have a functioning phone system in my own name just because I'm blind.
Ouch. That is um, honestly one of the most brutal and the most hands-off solutions I could have thought of. Just because it hits me that why can't Airtel just use things like voice, or well, voice not so much, but why can't they use things like a fingerprint? Because as someone in the tech lane, I can tell you that for a SIM card, a fingerprint scan, if done correctly, can be as secure, almost as secure at least, as an iris scan. Um, and for a blinking motion, right? Because a fingerprint scan, if done through, say, an infrared or a capacitive layer,
Yes.
can actually detect duplicate fingerprints because you can't pass the same amount of current through them. Um, and so I don't get why Airtel couldn't have just made their life easier and made everyone else's life easier by just implementing that.
I think you had a similar experience with them at one point.
Yes, and mine actually happened when I had a damaged SIM card. The hardware was actually damaged, so I had to move my number over to a different physical card. This was and to be clear, this was actually in a bit of a hurry because I had to depart for a 2 day trip literally the next day. Um,
Yeah.
And so I, went up to the Airtel center. This was in 2019.
Yes.
Um, and I asked them to actually move my number over.
Yep.
And they said, for various reasons, I quote, um, we need an iris scan. So the SIM card was technically in my name,
Yeah.
right? But my dad had gone to register it with me uh, a year, well, 2 years before we actually got this problem. They asked me for again various reasons to get my dad to perform an iris scan. One of the reasons they listed was we cannot verify a blind person's security, just like in your case,
Yeah.
which is true, but A, they were using iris scans and not blinking motions. And I'll tell you one thing, an iris scan is actually not that inaccessible in of itself, right? I mean, heck, even people on iPhones use their iris scan for Face ID and stuff. And I know that in a lot of offices in the US, iris scans are used to verify certain things. And I know of people who actually have taken iris. I have gone through iris scans multiple times, so I don't see the problem. And so they required my dad's iris scan because one of the reasons they listed was that I couldn't, according to them, perform a satisfactory iris scan. And to be clear, unlike Abhishek's case, both of my eyes are actually of the almost the same size, and so systems would not actually have difficulties in identifying my me from my eyes. And when my dad couldn't come, they refused to actually give. Well, they didn't refuse to give the SIM. They actually gave me a blank SIM card. Um, and they said that the only way I could actually get the number on it is when my dad went up to the store. And what ended up happening was my dad had to. This is again in the rain at 8 p.m.
Mm.
Uh, in the area that this is infamous for uh, crazy levels of traffic, extortionate amounts of traffic at night. Um, because people are coming through that, well, people go through that area when they come back from work and it's really, really busy. Um,
And for non
so
and for non-Indian viewers, the accounts that you have heard about the crumbling state of our roads are not colonialist tropes. They are actually true.
they are true, trust me.
Yes.
And that's another discussion in of itself.
Yes.
But yes, they are true. And I mean, if
And
we
you had
if we
to
wanted to,
navigate
we could.
that.
Yes.
So if traveling was not stressful enough, you were given a blank SIM and told that you could only get a proper one when you were accompanied by your dad.
Well, it would only activate when my dad actually went in there with this physical SIM card, right,
Yes.
and got it activated. Now, let's make something very clear here. My dad's coming from the other side of town, where his work is at, right?
Yes.
Um, he has to come to my and we wouldn't have done this if I was not traveling on the next day because it's just
Of course.
really really unnecessary.
Mm.
My dad travels over from the other side of town.
Yeah.
He comes over to my place, our place. He picks up the SIM card, and you can consider this time as like rush hour,
Yes.
right? Amidst rush hour, he goes to this center, which literally is closing at that time because he didn't have any choice. He had to come back from work at that hour, right?
Yes.
It's literally closing. They're like almost about to put the shutters, and he has to get it activated and then come home.
Yes.
And let me be clear, by rush hour I meant he left our house at 7:30 p.m. He returned by 9:15. The activation process took 10 minutes. So it's not it's not only inconvenient, it's unnecessary that they had to go through all this trouble for themselves and for their own customer because
And
I mean,
and
yeah, go
let's
ahead.
make something clear. When we say inconvenient, this is not inconvenient as in waiting in a queue type of inconvenient. This is inconvenient as in a blind person is being discriminated type of inconvenience. So it is
Indeed,
inconvenience resulting from discrimination.
indeed, because there was absolutely no need for them to tell me we cannot take an iris scan of
Yes,
you when you're blind.
yes,
So there's actually a myth that we can clear right away. Blind people or visually impaired people more generally can take face scans and can go through iris scans in most cases, unless there are of course you know problems with the spacing of eyes in terms of like size and everything, in which case it might cause complications, but even then there are solutions, and in 99% of cases people who have any sort of visual impairment can go through iris
yes,
scans.
scans.
I have done it and I can testify to it.
Yes, yes. And even if not iris scans, as you said, there are much more effective. There are other ways of doing it, such as fingerprints. So yeah, and I should say that there are uh, we I think one of the first myths about accessibility we should get into this, that what you just said segues nicely into, is this question of accessibility versus security. uh, the myth, if I am articulating it correctly, is goes something like this: you can't have a proper balance between accessibility and security, and in most cases there will have to be a the balance will have to tilt in favor of security. Now I think what we should say is, what we both agree on is that you can balance out the two considerations properly.
Indeed. And as a computer science student, as someone who has programmed secure solutions in the past,
Yes,
I can testify to this. There is absolutely uh, there's no reason to imbalance accessibility and security. Given, I mean, sure, if you said the same statement like 15 years ago, it could have been true. But with the current advances in technology, it is just not true.
good.
And this is not just true. In fact, this is a good segue before we move. It's not just true for things like face recognition and stuff. It's also true for the web. Um, Someone actually, this is a funny incident. Back in 20, in fact, I read about this back in 2015, 2016 types. Android phones at that time, actually, when you were in password fields, even when you're trying to type the characters and before you lift your finger on the Google, for those watching this video, by the way, who do not know how people type on Android, it's by dragging your finger across the screen as your screen reader or text to speech software that reads everything out reads the letters, and then once you reach a letter that you want to type, you lift your finger and it actually keys in the letter,
Letters,
or
numbers, whichever.
yeah, letter, number, or special character.
Yes,
um so back when Android 5 or Android 6 was around, even when you were actually dragging your finger across the keyboard in password fields, it would say bullet and it would not tell you which letter it is.
yes,
Which, I mean, let's be realistic, unless you connected a keyboard in, it rendered your device useless even when you're trying to just sign into your Google account.
yes.
Um, and the funny thing is, Google themselves have actually proved that this is the wrong approach by later building in the functionality of actually reading the keyboard as you're dragging your finger around. So you don't have to make the password field speak every character that you type, but you can just reach the middle ground where while you're dragging your finger across the keyboard,
It's
it reads the characters, and then when you lift your finger, it just says bullet or star or whatever you want it
exactly,
to say.
exactly. Yes, and it's not just Google or someone who has done this as an isolated example. There are multiple cases where accessibility and security have been balanced out very well. And
And this is actually a very good segue to the second example, I think, that you had.
yes, I mean uh, we could talk.
Unless you want to teeter on this one for a bit.
Second example, sorry. We will come to that later. I was thinking
Oh,
about
right. Okay.
I was thinking about discussing the specific examples that I have encountered, that we have talked about, of accessibility and security uh, uh, being balanced well. Uh, do you think this might be a good point for me to?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, sure. I think it's a good thing we can cover right now. Go
Yes.
right ahead.
So yes. Um, one of the one of to return to this SIM card example. Um, I of course mentioned that I have a SIM card with a UK phone provider called O2. Now with O2, you may ask, how did the process work? Uh, Unfortunately, I can't remember the all the granular details of it, because I ordered my phone in September 2021, and there were lots of things I was doing at the time, because I just moved to London from Bangalore, India, and moving to a new country, even with a friendly immigration system, is not the easiest thing in the world. But what I can remember is that there was nothing like an iris scan or anything. As far as I can remember, actually, all that I did was order the O2 SIM online and have it delivered to my address. I just had to give a passport photocopy on the O2 website, and once it had gone through some ID checks, it just delivered my SIM to the UK address, which I'd ask them to deliver it to. And O2 has quite a secure process in terms of, if you want to top up your SIM. So the way this works is, you you have to have you have what are known as data bundles. So £10, 50, £15, £20 data bundles, and you have to have at least £20 on your SIM on a certain by a certain date on every month. So as my SIM arrived on the 13th of September, I have to have £20 on my SIM every on the 13th of every month. Otherwise, my data bundle expires. So um, so I have to log into an online portal to top up my SIM, and they have perfectly good security procedures to do that. I have to set a password and everything. um, and uh, and and every so often, if I don't log in for a long time, because it sometimes has a method by which, if you once do a top up, you can set it to automatically take the amount of money, whether it's 10, 15, or £20 from your card, without having to manually log in every time. So that is basically what I did. And So if you want to log in to the online portal for any other reason and haven't logged in for a while, they will just do the usual to multi-factor authentication thing that Outlook, for example, does. By once you type in your password, they send a text to your phone, which has a code, which you have to read and enter into a blank space on the O2 login page. And so that you would say is quite okay. Wouldn't you agree, Pranav?
Indeed, and I mean, for especially for things like SIM cards, that level of security is actually perfectly acceptable because it is not easy to breach. At the same time, being convenient for the user,
Yes,
being less of a hassle, because especially remember when you're logging into your SIM provider's website, chances are you probably don't have the greatest amount of patience at that time.
yes,
Neither do you have the greatest amount, like you don't have that much time to actually sit down and figure things out.
yes.
You want to get in, get your work done, and get
Out.
out
Yeah,
of there.
yeah, yeah. And
And so,
yeah, and
go right.
on their portals, and on O2's portal, and on other portals that I've used in the UK to top up various cards. For example, the card that I use on the London Underground, the metro, to pay for my travel, they have what are known as skip to content buttons, as in buttons that allow me to skip to the main part of the page which has the functions I need to use, or which has the content which I need to read. So I don't have to keep navigating past loads of useless information, because for a sighted person it's easy to scroll past, but for a screen reader user it's much harder. So these things can be done, and have been done in
Indeed.
indeed. And yes, and for people might argue that, what is it called, uh, okay, sim card is one thing. It's perhaps, uh, uh, there are things which require much more caution, than sim cards. For example, banking. But banking is again one thing that they've managed well. I can That has been managed well by various banks, in terms of accessibility and security and balancing the two considerations. I can speak from experience, having used Barclays Bank in the UK. Uh, um, um, Unlike HDFC Bank in India, whose online login portal has a visual capture, which is uh, uh, um, a picture of text or numbers that show up on the screen once you type in your password, and other login details, which you have to type in by looking at, and which a screen reader can't interact with well. Barclays has a different system by which you um, have a combination of a password and what is known as, which is a combination, which is a set of letters, numbers, special characters, and what is known as a memorable word. And they will ask you to enter the password, and then you'll get two boxes where you have to enter, uh, depending on what they ask you, two characters of the memorable word. So if my memorable word was Abhishek Dhol, and on Tuesday they said, first enter the third character of your memorable word, and then enter the last character of your memorable word, I would enter H and L respectively, and then it would allow me to log in. And they have their process says that to log into their online portal, you have to do all this, typing in a password and the various characters of the memorable word they ask you to do, within 5 minutes. And for a screen reader user on a computer, especially one who is quite familiar with a screen reader, um, uh, five 5 minutes for that login process is 4 minutes, as I discussed with Pranav, 4 minutes and 40 seconds longer than we need.
Indeed. Uh, because remember that when you got a screen reader, which is actually speaking it, in fact, I can actually show this. Abhishek won't be able to hear this,
Speech mode.
but
Rate
is
25. Rate 30.
speaking at rates like
Menu button
this,
left sub menu more options. Button recall. Toggle button not present details.
which is
Speech
pretty
mode off.
fast.
You might want to tell them how much exactly that is.
Right. I have got Eloquence, which is a voice, and it's running at 35. Well, it's running at a rate of 35. It's in percentages, with something called rate boost turned on, um, which is really fast. It is close to eSpeak, which is the default voice in NVDA, which is our screen reader. It's close to that, around 80 words per minute with rate boost turned on. So it's really fast. And when you're running at these speeds, when you've been using these speeds for like years now, right? You get accustomed to it. Um,
And
and
even for a new user, something like the Barclays login process, uh, uh, even if this was like you'd been using it just for a month or so, you'd maximum need 3 out of the 5 minutes to do it, right? You wouldn't need the entire five
in
minutes at all.
yeah. Also, not to mention, this is not even factoring that screen readers actually have commands to jump to various part of web pages, which makes your process that much easier.
Now,
So,
so what happens in Barclays is you can't, at least in Barclays Bank, I don't know about others, but you can't jump from one part of the page to the other. So if, for example, they ask you to enter the second character of your memorable word then the seventh one. Once you've entered the second character, the page is automatically programmed to take you to the box to enter the seventh character, which makes it faster.
To be honest, that's even faster than actually
Yeah,
physically moving to the edit field, which which fixes everything, right?
yeah.
So the the thing that, in fact, this is one of the things that we want to mention. um, Accessibility doesn't actually interfere with either security or any other thing, actually, to be honest. um, Especially if, for example, if you take websites like, I'm assuming Barclays has at least either kept accessibility in mind from the get-go, or from a long enough time period that now it becomes easier for them to actually just mainstream integrate it when
See,
they're updating their site.
what I should say here is what should be pointed out is that unlike India, the UK has one had disability rights protection laws for a long time, which means that
Yep.
it's very hard for somebody to get away with not having accessibility in mind, especially a bank like Barclays. And two, uh, India technically does have a disability, an anti-disability discrimination law protecting the disabled from discrimination. But unlike the UK's law, it has been very um, lax, designed in a very lax way, allowing keeping so many loopholes open that it's as good as if there was no law at all. Uh, the yeah, the Equality Act 2010 in the UK and the Accessibility Regulations 2018 are so restrictive that you'd have to you'd be really hard put to get out of it. In fact, just to mention, to not to get away with not making your uh, mobile app or website accessible, you have to uh, uh, submit to the government a claim known as a disproportionate burden claim, which one has to state that it's going to take up like almost the entirety of your budget, so something like 80% or more of your budget, which it never will, by the way, uh,
No.
almost never will. And two, uh, the accessibility uh, requirements that the regulations have set down will not help any disabled users trying to use um, the app or website who is claiming that it's a disproportionate burden to make their services accessible. Now, these two provisions taken together, as you can see, you don't have to be a lawyer to see that they are very hard to get around. Uh, and
Yeah.
the statistics prove it. Only according to the UK government in the year 2019 to 20, as far as I can remember, only 1.05% of disproportionate burden claims succeeded.
Oh, wow.
Yes,
And you got to remember that the number of disproportionate burden claims is also a small subset of the number of actual set of software that's released in that time,
yes,
which um, is a lot, especially for countries like the UK.
yes.
Um,
And also, what we should mention is that, and this is no criticism to anybody, but in a country like the UK or even the US, where these things are much more established in terms of what are the rights that are there and people knowing about those rights, the various uh, organizations such as the Royal National Institute for the Blind in the UK, which works for the empowerment of blind people there, are much more confident in speaking out against this sort of thing, and in spend and even in putting large amounts of money in investment into litigation uh, where compliance is not present. And these organizations, at least in the UK and in the US, unlike let us say, the biggest organization in India, the National Foundation for the Blind, are taken very seriously. Nobody messes with them.
Oh yeah, no, I've seen that. um, One more thing I want to touch on, actually, this hit me, is the idea of the budget. It's another myth where people say accessibility is too expensive,
Yes,
right? And that's not true. And I'll start with a very personal example. I have been running an organization called Vidya Drishti, or VD for short,
yes,
for the past, what is it? Almost 2 years.
yes.
Um, Now, and I can tell you one thing: our costs of running our website,
Hmm.
right, right now, are effectively close to zero in the grand scheme of things.
Yes,
That's the one thing I'm really proud of the way that I've been able to actually manage to get it up. We incur, I can't share exact figures, but we incur somewhere in the cost of $1,000 per month, out of which around, I want to say, $20 is actually for our website. Um, and out of that, accessibility has actually never cost us anything
yes,
in the past. Um, and so, as a developer who, to be honest, I've run many other projects for zero budget, right?
yes,
I have not paid a single cent or a single rupee or a single pence for any, like, in fact, I have had two mobile apps on the Play Store, and both of them have been run off of zero budget as hobby projects. And I have I've been able to build in accessibility for no cost. So I don't see how well. I mean, even with the time where I've worked in other companies, I don't see how accessibility actually contributes. Even if it does contribute to your budget, I mean, let's be honest. There are so many things that contribute more to your budget. Like, there's hosting, right, for your site. Will you say I'm gonna host it on the cheapest server available just because I don't have the budget?
no,
you real if you do that, you realize you're gonna get slaughtered by the media.
yes.
So so accessibility. I mean, accessibility costs a small fraction of a small fraction of your budget,
If it costs anything at all.
if it costs anything at all. Um, I know from personal research that even companies like Apple, who invest heavily in accessibility, don't actually pay a lot in terms of accessibility. They don't require to. I mean, the only things that you pay for are, from my experience at least, people who actually help you with accessibility. You gotta pay them, um, and probably some firms for accessibility audits and stuff.
Yes,
Again, people, right? And then finally, in some cases, some sneaky marketing genius will probably market a tool to improve accessibility for a slightly paid amount. You gotta pay a little for that, right? In some,
yeah,
well, I've not seen a case like that for the past like 6 years, so
yes,
um, not really happening. So, and especially with technology moving towards things like open source, and sort of a free for all area in terms of everything's open, accessibility actually has even less of a budget than it did like 10 to 15 years ago. Because you got to remember that even when you're looking at people who, I mean, even if you're not looking at your own software, right?
yes,
If you're looking at accessibility in a company, for example, digital accessibility in you don't have to pay that much. Most people have their own laptops. Well, if they don't, I'm sure that as a company, you're probably giving machines to people who don't require assistive technology as well, right?
yes,
Um, I know a lot of firms that give their employees, heck, even Google does it. Google and Apple, they give their employees machines to work on Ultrabooks. Um, and as for assistive technology, well, you've got a free screen reader that, dare I say, from my experience, works better than the paid ones. So it's personal choice, but it at least works as good as well as the paid ones. Um, and probably the only thing you probably need to pay for in terms of assistive tech is maybe some hardware magnifiers, which are also getting phased out, and probably in some cases some tools to OCR PDFs if the person even needs that, for example, right? Um,
I think we should bring in a slight level of nuance into this by saying that there are some circumstances in which payment of some sort might have to be done, but but just by by mentioning those, I think our viewers will understand how rare those cases are. Um, so the first one is, some of your viewers might bring up, especially those who might know something about this, might bring up the example of a bank who was threatened with a bank in India who was threatened with legal action if they did not make um, their platforms accessible, and who had to spend about who had who incurred quite a lot of cost because of that. Now, a disability rights activist who actually studied law at the postgraduate level at the University of Oxford was involved in this case, and he was the one who had written the letter to the bank saying that, look, your platforms are inaccessible. You need to make them accessible. He, in an interview, he describes being told by a bank insider who he was friendly with that the bank incurred nearly 15 lakh cost in rupees to make their bank, that is, when we say 15 lakh, that's about uh, um,
Around $20,000.
20,000, yeah, $20,000, 15,000 pounds around.
Yep.
So, in accessible, in making their platforms accessible. Now, why did this happen? Why did they have to pay 15,000 pounds or 15 lakh rupees to do this? This was because they had started out without accessibility in mind. So
Right.
you have to redesign. Redesigning is one of the cases in which you will incur costs. If you start in this day and age, if you start without accessibility in mind, if you start with the default assumption that that a lot of people have about these things, which is the blind are a huge inconvenience, it's not worth it, accessibility is just too much work, then one, you will definitely face the flack for it, and two, once you give in to the flack, which you will which you'll pretty much have to do at some point, that is when you'll incur the cost. So it's just like the just it's just like a simple a case of childhood discipline in school. If you don't use bad words in school, your parents won't prevent you from using your phone at home. However, if you do, then they will. Of course, they will. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and I mean that budget was on them, so
Completely.
um, and let's be honest, even that much for a bank, especially one in India, the one that we're talking about has slightly high caliber. $20,000, 15,000 pounds, or 15 lakh rupees is not
It's
much.
not much.
So they could clearly afford to pay it out of their pocket. So even when accessibility demands slightly higher payments, it's on you in 99% of the cases, and it's not that much. Um,
Yeah.
we can see from the stats itself that there's like the number of cases that actually require inaccessibility or require to be able to get away with it from the law um, can be counted on fingers
Yes.
because they're so niche. So the idea, and in fact, there's a very good conclusion to this that I'd like to draw. Accessibility should be implemented right from the core because that will make your life a hell of a lot easier as a programmer or as a manager or what have you, as a user, right?
Yes.
And let's I mean there's another problem with actually not implementing it earlier on in the earlier stages, is you lose a chunk of your user base. However small or big that chunk may be, you'd lose a chunk of your user base, which no one really wants.
Yes.
Because what happens is you actually lose the key element of trust when your platform is inaccessible to begin with. And then, even if you actually make it, or make, sort of strive towards making it accessible later on, you gotta show a lot to actually gain that trust back,
Yes.
which, as we've seen in many cases, is not easy to do, especially in the software world. It is not easy, especially considering that there are competitors out there, and today accessibility is actually being used um,
As a market.
as a marketing technique.
Yes. Yes.
And I mean, however, I may have my gripes with the way companies are marketing today, but that's a brilliant idea, because that's a differentiating factor you have against other companies.
Yeah.
You can make your product more accessible.
That's progress. I mean, from at least from 2005, that's definitely a huge step in the right direction. That is progress. And yeah, again, I will add to this. This is let me first say that this point is not official legal advice. I'm not regulated or allowed by anyone to give legal advice. But what I will say as a tip for a, a service provider or somebody like that, an app developer who is in law considered to be a service provider, who might be considering uh, moving their base, let us say, or their product based from a country like India or Taiwan to the UK or Australia, your duties in law to make things accessible are what are known as anticipatory duties. So you can't start with something inaccessible in the UK and get away under the Equality Act when a blind person, let's say, has trouble with it by saying, "Oh, it didn't occur to me that blind people would be using this service, or that I did not think of this disability or know about that disability." You have to think, you have to plan, you have to do it. Otherwise, the way the Equality Act is written, it means you will get in trouble. Or even the Americans with Disabilities Act in the US, the way those pieces of legislation are written, it means that if you don't plan out these things, anticipate accessibility, you will get in trouble, which you don't want to do. And your only other option is to leave the US and UK markets out, if which also is a very, which at least from my perspective is a very stupid business decision to make.
No, it doesn't. You're throwing away a chunk of the market then,
Yes.
like a sizable chunk of the market.
Yes. But yeah, I think I was about to mention a second kind of scenario in which we you might incur costs for accessibility,
Right.
which which I think we should deal with now. And that is when you want there may be other scenarios which haven't occurred to me today, which may occur in future times when I gain more experience and stuff, but these are the first scenario which we just discussed, you don't have when you didn't have accessibility in mind in the first place. And this one that we're going to discuss now are the two scenarios that we can think of, or at least that I can think of at the moment. So the second scenario is when um, incurring a cost to improve the type of product that somebody is using will increase their productivity. And this may sound vague, but I will give you a specific example, trying to leave out as much identifying information of the individuals concerned as possible. So I attended a networking event from my law school in the UK just before returning to India, where I met a visually impaired lawyer who was working at a pretty well known law firm in the UK, which specializes in family law. This is the law on divorce and things like that. And this lawyer had some visual acuity, which means they could see a bit. And so what the firm did for them is, in the UK or in the US, the law requires that whatever software packages a disabled person needs, or whatever reasonable adjustments or accommodations they may need, um, you as an employer cannot put the burden, or the financial burden of those adjustments, on the disabled person. You have to pay it yourself if you employ them. And so, uh, um, a difficulty that this lawyer had when he was at university was, he was slower at reading documents than his sighted counterparts, because he used to use JAWS, which is a paid screen reader software. Now,
Ah,
and this was, and this, by the way, his usage of JAWS was paid for at university by the UK government, using something they call the Disability Students Allowance, or DSA. Now, when he was moving into work, at his training contract interview, he told the recruiters that this is the difficulty I will have. So you'll have we might have to look into a solution for this. And what they did was they purchased uh, a software package called Zoom Text, which is a combination of JAWS and a magnifying software, um, which allowed him to use a combination of hearing and the sight which he had to read documents faster, using JAWS's rate boost equivalent function and what sight he himself had. Now, if you look up Zoom Text, you'll see that the licenses for that software package cost something like $2,400 a year. But
yeah, I've seen that.
yeah, but what is the ROI on that $2,400 dollars of return investment? Uh, your own employee, in this case, the blind lawyer working at the firm was able to read his documents faster. And not only that, his sighted colleagues, he told me, tried it out themselves. And by using a combination of their sight and hearing, they were themselves able to read documents even faster than before.
Right, and that is a budget you should take. In fact, I've seen a lot of companies. In fact, it's progress that we're making today. It's better than what it was. I've seen a lot of companies do it. Firms do it now, where they're paying extra, but it's for improved productivity. It's for improved efficiency, um, and it completely makes
And
sense. Um,
let's be frank about the lived reality of the disabled here, whether it's blind or anyone else, or any other type of disability. If you have a disabled employee, they are likely to you are likely to be able to retain them more easily, for a variety of reasons, such as, for the blind, for example, once you learn the orientation of how to get from your home to your office, or things like that, you would find it harder to learn a new thing repeatedly. So you would prefer to unlearn and relearn those things as few times as possible. So that's why disabled employees are more likely to stay long term in an organization. So this is a type of investment you want to make, if you have any sense. The Indian
Indeed.
the Indian banks, £15,000, $20,000 slash 15 lakh rupees. That is an investment you don't want to make. You don't have to
If you
make
have
it,
any
if
sense.
you have any sense. Yes.
Right. And I mean, as to be fair, to be fair, if you cannot make such an investment, it is now I'm not going to say you shouldn't do it, but if you cannot for financial reasons, a I know that a lot of these Freedom Scientific as a firm itself for for offering accessible solutions. They're a bit aggressive with their DRM policies and their pricing, and I have been very vocal about how they price stuff like JAWS or Zoom text and everything. Um, but even they offer to companies lower reduced prices alternatives to make things easier, and even then there are lower priced versions of such tools available online. However, if you do have the budget, this is something you want to spring for. Because, I mean, let's be realistic. Even as just a business standpoint, this is going to net you more profit because each person is then producing more. Well, they're producing more work done or more output if they're able to work more efficiently in the same amount of time. That's basically what efficiency is.
And as
Um,
the example of this blind lawyer in Britain should have demonstrated, um, the disabled can often and often do bring unique innovations to the table. I mean, the his sighted colleagues were then able to work. Him and his sighted colleagues were then, if they were working at X speed before, with a combination of all of them using Zoom text, they were able to work at 4x. So
indeed.
that is a clear example of how much somebody can bring to the table who is disabled. Um, so 90% of the time, as as we have pointed out, and as not just we, but even the United Nations Committee on the on the enforcement of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and other very authoritative bodies such as the UK Equality and Human Rights Commission (EHRC) have pointed out. It is accessibility usually costs nothing, and digital accessibility even less. Uh, and and when and when it does, it's either because you, the developer slash employer or whatever, or slash service provider, have made what the Arabs call a camel's breakfast of everything, or two, because the cost is justified, and is justified in the circumstances in terms of what benefits it can bring you.
Indeed, and one of the biggest benefits, in fact, this is a very good segue to one of the, well, I guess the final thing that I really want to talk about here. One of the benefits that it brings you is someone who is visually impaired or really has got any sort of, impairment, right? If you will, brings to the table a perspective that you haven't actually considered. Even especially if you're trying to improve accessibility for your product, even if the person is not working as an accessibility tester, an accessibility testing. I mean, heck, even if the person's working in HR, right? That person brings, well, that person's probably the one who knows accessibility the best around, from an end user's perspective,
Yeah.
and thus they can offer you solutions that you probably wouldn't get if you were to hire someone who claims to be an accessibility test lead or something who probably hasn't actually experienced these technologies on a day-to-day basis. So that's a very important thing you got to consider. And actually, as you know, as we were talking about, there are a lot of these things, right? There are a lot of these things that you look in daily life that these people might suggest to you when it comes to accessibility or when it comes to improving the accessibility of certain products. And what I want to go into right now, which is quite related, is what are these? What are some of the look? I'm a visually impaired person, so I think we can talk best about some of the best things to improve visual accessibility. But as someone who's a developer, I can also mention things that you probably want to do that include other types of accessibility and that improve them. Because if and this hopefully will be useful to you if you are someone who either has a small team, or if you're just learning, or if you are I don't know, if you yourself are trying to suggest things to others, or if you're someone like me who works on hobby projects all the time and has that to do in their free time. Um, the first thing, in fact, we'll be busting a few myths right here. The first thing to talk about is a very simple one. Include certain options. For example, the skip to content one that we mentioned earlier on. Skip to content, jump to top, jump to bottom, things like that, right? It's always good to include such options on your site, your mobile app, whatever, right? Because what happens is it allows the person to remember in today's world, the idea is that you want to get your work done as quickly and efficiently as possible, going back to the point of efficiency. And this goes a long way in improving that, because all of a sudden you don't have to scroll. Let me tell you, as especially on mobile devices, scrolling, well, mobile devices is still fine, but it's terrible, like scrolling on a mobile device. And I've been very vocal about this on Twitter, on about Twitter's own mobile app. Scrolling on mobile devices, especially through long feeds and stuff or long menus, is painful, like literally physically painful as well, but also it's just time consuming.
Yes.
And I think Abhishek can testify to this.
Yes. And
It's
even if you can't um, uh, incorporate something like a skip to content link or button on, let's say, a website, if you have some programming difficulties or whatever, there are ways you can get around them. And the easiest is, you can use you can just have fewer options that they have to navigate past, that a blind person has to navigate past to get to the content of what they need. For example, I have in at my university, I have to just like O2, I have to top up what is known as a laundry card to do my laundry. So I have to top it up with money before applying it to my laundries, to the university laundry system every time on an online portal. And now to that laundry portal has that laundry system at UK universities, which is called Circuit Laundry, has a whole host of accessibility issues of various kinds, which we can discuss on another day, and which has in fact made it so unpopular that there are whole Twitter accounts devoted to making fun of Circuit Laundry. But leave that. The good thing about Circuit Laundry is they don't have a skip to content button on their online portal, but I have to navigate past only two options to get to the content I need on their top up page, which is the confirmation button to confirm that my laundry card number is correct, and the link that would redirect me to my PayPal login page to upload the money, how much ever money I wanted, whether it was £5, £10, or whatever, to my card, to my laundry card. So I have to navigate past
right.
only two options. While I'll quickly finish this. While on the Times of India website, for example, I'm not trying to bash Indian versus UK websites here. There are some UK websites which are as guilty of this as Indian ones. But on the Times of India website, for example, to get to the first heading of of the news story that I want to read, I have to do a page down at least twice. And sometimes, and on some Indian websites that I've seen, I have to actually like search for the text of the heading, of the content, by like guessing what it is from the title of the website. And now if you have to uh, use the find function on the internet to search for content, instead of having a skip to content button of few options to scroll to it, you are really in a bad place.
It's gonna throw users off your
Yes.
site. It's gonna throw in masses to it, because honestly, skip to content as an option, right, or just having fewer options is is very useful for someone with visual impairments or even someone with motor disabilities, because it's hard to scroll through all that when your wrist is hurting, right? To
Yes.
put it in a funny light, right? But it's also just as useful for someone with no impairment or no physical impairment as such, right? Because all of a sudden you don't have to scroll through or see so many things on your screen at one point. You can just hit that and go wherever you want to.
Yes.
Um,
And there are, of course,
And
other things such as introducing color contrasts on your page for people with issues viewing fonts in certain colors. Um, Font contrasts, color contrast, zoom contrast functions. All these things are there.
yes,
These are things you have to keep in mind. Otherwise, you are discriminating against the disabled. We're being blunt here. You are discriminating if you
totally.
don't. Now, how there are so if there are so many things to keep in mind. It's understandable that you could feel overwhelmed by us just talking about it in the video. But as Pranav will know better even than I do, in fact, there is online guidance available from a very authoritative source. The World Wide Web Consortium has published a series of guidelines called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines
Yep.
(WCAG). Mm, And I can see, if I can understand from Pranav's voice that he loves this as much as I do. Uh, these guidelines, and the reason we love these things so much is because um, they give you guidance in very granular detail about what do you need to do to make your website or mobile app accessible. How do you do it
To the
is a question they answer in a great deal of detail. And not only do they give you guidance, they also have a kind of marking criteria system about how accessible, what you have to do to make your website go from least accessible to most accessible.
Yep, and in fact, they even have on their pages and on various others where they have these guides. They have actually code samples and visual samples where you can actually view and play around with of sites that are inaccessible and things that you don't want to do. I don't think there is any less abundance of that today, but I'm being cynical. But they really show you what to do and what not to do. And in fact, the cool thing is, you have such tools as scanners as for example Google's accessibility scanner, which they worked with the World Wide Web Consortium to develop with, and in fact there are Chrome extensions for the web as well that actually when you click start scan and then actually start, so what it does is it starts recording your clicks. What it does is it actually records what you click on and how you navigate, and then it gives you an entire chart full of details, where it would tell you how to improve the accessibility of certain parts. It would, in fact, with code samples, it would actually tell you exactly how you were about to how you were to go about improving the accessibility. For example, touch targets is one thing that I want to talk about in terms of mobile devices, because especially with people with dexterity problems. You want to have touch targets. Touch targets are the area that each touchable element on a mobile device has, that before it's out of bounds for the touch to be registered and for things to happen. You want to have touch targets that are large, so that someone either with slightly big fingers or someone with dexterity, slightly limited dexterity, can actually touch these touch targets in an easy way without actually having to use their finger as I don't know, a clock's needle, for example, to point exactly at the center of the button and touch it. Which would be rather painful. So, actually, they recommend a touch target size of at least 48 pixels, but it varies. And they'll tell you based on the device and based on the type of users you have, what sort of touch targets you should have, for example.
Yes.
And another thing about this, and another thing that they tell you, in fact, this is a good segue to another thing that we want to talk about in terms of this, is what sort of alt text or what sort of
Uh,
text you should be putting on your buttons.
before we move to that, I think we should mention that um, um, uh, this the WCAG is not just a document that is used for guidance purposes. It has
No.
in fact been incorporated into official legal instruments. For example, the UK accessibility regulations and the statutory instruments that were addendums to the Equality Act, or even the US Accessibility Act of 2019, requires websites in the US and UK respectively to comply with one of the highest WCAG standards, which is WCAG 2.11a.
Yep.
Yeah,
WCAG is, as I said, it's a standard for legal
metric.
accessibility audits and checks. Yes, and in fact, if you submit your site or your mobile app for audits, which a lot of companies do for accessibility audits, WCAG is what's used. So it's probably a good idea to know WCAG. I wouldn't say like it's the Bible, but I would say know WCAG probably really
And
well.
even if you don't want to know, even if you find WCAG rather uh, too granular in its detail, uh, government websites such as gov.uk, or which is the UK government's official website, and the European Commission, which is uh, an official website of an, uh, an EU, European Union institution called the European Commission, have um, explanations in simplified, easy, everyday language of what the WCAG is explaining.
Indeed, and those are very useful actually, um, especially when you're just starting out in terms of accessibility. Probably a very good idea to read that.
Yes. In
Um,
fact, we might even, I think what we might do in the description box, a good thing to do is we'll have to put quite a few links. We might as well link up the accessibility regulations of the UK and the of UK's guidance, at least. I'm most familiar, so I know where to get it quickly. We should link up some of these guidances with our video in the description box. Would you agree?
in Indeed, I will be sure to put that in
I will
because I'm
send you the
sure
links.
people would.
Yes.
Sure, sure. That's something that we can throw in there, along with the link to the WCAG official, document, and the link to these accessibility scanners that I've talked about. Because trust me, as a developer, those are things you want. Even as a tester, it makes your life a hell of a lot easier. Um, so
So yeah,
it's a really useful tool.
I think we should now discuss the question of this mystery known as alt text.
Which is really our sort of our final big thing that we want to talk about
Yes.
here. And it is big, and in fact, if you followed either Abhishek or myself on Twitter for a long enough time frame, you will know that we are really really vocal about all text on there. I've in my entire time on Twitter made one accidental error of not including all text, and even that was actually, funnily enough, on a tweet that was generated by an app, and I didn't actually realize that it had images in it because it was on me, to be honest. I didn't proofread the tweet; I just hit tweet, and I didn't actually look if there were images. So, but we have been very vocal about all text, and we have called out people for not including all text, but also suggested a lot of all text related things. And we have a few things about that. The first is actually we want to crack down on a myth
Yeah.
here.
In fact, yeah, before we crack down on the myth about that tweet where you forgot to include alt text, I think I called you out on that one. And
You did.
apologies if it was too harsh. I,
Oh no, it was totally required. It was totally required because it was on me, to be honest, and I am not. I will accept complete responsibility for that because I did not proofread the tweet as I usually do. I was kind of in a hurry, and so I just hit tweet. Uh, although that would be a cool idea. Twitter should probably include like a thing where, in fact, they're
they're
doing it
doing
now. To
a
be honest,
reminder to include.
a reminder to include all text. That would probably save me
I think
next time. The next time I tweet.
I think, but I think it's best to know for our viewers to first know what an alt text is before coming up with a reminder
Indeed.
for what it uses.
Alt text or alternative text is a textual description for images that is read out by screen readers uh, to give people using said screen readers a better idea of what the image is. Um, it is used from everywhere from the web, on websites, well, hopefully at least, to places like Twitter, to Instagram as well, actually, funnily enough, on posts and stuff, from the limited time on Instagram that I've had at least. So, one of the myths that actually, there's one myth that we want to crack down on, which is people say that, well, people are sort of driven to believe through various sources that alt text actually hampers the visual sort of parts of the image. It makes it harder for sighted people to actually see or interact with the image. This is in no way true. As a developer, let me tell you what happens, and I'm going to get technical here, but I need to do this to ensure that people who think this is true know that it's not.
Yeah, we need to drive.
The way,
We
sorry,
need to drive it home. Yeah.
we need to drive it home, yes. and and as a developer, right, as someone who actually codes these things, it's it kind of makes me laugh every time I read this, because here's how alt text works. All text is actually never visually displayed on the page, to the point where someone actually looking at the image won't even know that all text is there. Why, you ask? Well, because the way all text works is it actually sends the text to be read out by the screen reader. So the screen readers that you use have what are called APIs, or application programming interfaces, which are basically a set of rules for other programs to interact with the screen readers. Say if a program wants the screen reader to speak certain text, for example, or stop speaking at a certain amount of time, they can send requests to the screen reader to do so. And so the way all text works is actually it sends this text over to the screen reader every time the user lands focus on the image, which allows the screen reader to read this text. The text in itself is actually never displayed visually or printed to the page. Even if you print out a page, it's never there. All you have is the image. So there's no actual way that the text can hamper the visual capabilities of the image or the visual aspects of the image. Why? Because the visual parts of the image are not what's touched. What is touched is the metadata of the image, which is basically just the data that the page loads about the image, that helps it understand the image better. Um, and that has no connection to the visual aspects of the image,
Yes,
except for things like the width.
yeah, and it doesn't crop the image or cut out any part of the image in any way.
No, it does not. Again, because it never visually displays the text. It doesn't have to do any of that.
Yes,
So,
and
this is something, yeah, sorry,
yes,
go
and
ahead.
I think this is a myth that extends to accessibility more generally. Alt text is one of those specific cases uh, where it just helps the blind, and like it doesn't, as we have explained, it doesn't do anything for the sighted. It doesn't help the sighted, nor does it harm them. But there are many instances in general in accessibility to kind of broaden the focus of the discussion uh, before again uh, honing it in on alt text. Uh, um, Accessibility can, as we said, can often help this even people who do not have disabilities. I mean, if you, for example, if you have labeled buttons on apps, which with labels that screen readers can read, or if your screen for an app or a website is organized well and not cluttered, it doesn't just help the blind, it helps even the sighted. I mean, we should, I mean, this video is as much about calling out, I think, those people who are not doing accessibility right and who definitely should be. So I will give a specific example of Paytm here, which is an company.
Oh.
Yes, yes, and in fact, they only were ready to sit down with somebody to discuss accessibility when a lawyer wrote an official complaint to the chief commissioner for persons with disabilities and published that complaint publicly on LinkedIn to nearly 500 connections. So that just shows what their attitude, and I think what the attitude among a lot of Indian established companies towards accessibility is. Was so now one thing. My dad actually told me about Paytm when we were discussing this question of how inaccessible they are. He told me that a friend of his had told him that it's so cluttered and messed up that even the sighted find it confusing and irritating to use. Leave out the blind. Any consideration of the blind and them using it. So making things accessible can often result in greater convenience, as illustrated by the example of the phone provider O2, and it can even result in greater beauty, which, for example, could be something that Paytm could work on in terms of the layout, so which would greatly enhance customer satisfaction, both of whose qualities would greatly enhance customer satisfaction.
Indeed, and in fact, if you're talking about PTM specifically, it is actually aiming at the common person who probably has no time to navigate complex UIs. So this would work like magic for a company like PTM, um, which which it should take. So in general, the idea of accessibility is it rarely, or I mean, if I'm
Or
being bold, I would even say never, close to never, actually hampers usability for people who don't actually need it in an accessible, point of view. Um, and this gets us back to alt text, because that's the thing with alt text that we have seen a lot of people try to use as an excuse to get away with for not including alt text, and it's absolutely not true. If you're one of those people, please don't use it as an excuse. It's not going to work. And if you're someone who is requiring alt text or sees such a thing, I would advise ensuring that the person knows that that's not true, and that it's still very important to include alt text.
yes, if you're a person who is encountering, if you're a person A who is encountering another person B who is making this excuse that all text will inconvenience the sighted, who are the majority, uh, you, um, this video should hopefully be helpful in arming you to combat this mentality of B.
Indeed. And now, say you are okay with including alt text. The final thing that I want to talk about here is just a few tips on how to write alt text. I really like how Twitter handles its alt text description, limits and stuff, because it's a very thin line that you got to walk in. It's a very fine line that you got to walk on when you're talking about alt text. You don't want it to be too long, because then it's gonna feel like an essay. Also, remember that the person's listening to this, so they probably want it to be slightly short. So you don't want it to be too long, but also make sure that the alt text is not too not short in the sense that it hampers the perception of the image that the person has. um, Also, in some cases, if your image is slightly generalized, say it's a cat, you can just get away with mentioning a cat with certain characteristics. For example,
Bushi.
to be fair, I know very little about cats, but yeah, a cat with a bushy fur coat and, I don't know, green eyes. I guess, do cats have green eyes?
No idea. Anyway, so yeah, that's a very good point, and um, as I mentioned earlier,
Oops. Um, you cut out there, buddy.
hello,
Yep, you're back.
you can hear me now, can't you?
I can hear you. Yeah, you
Sorry,
can go ahead.
sorry. I don't know. My screen might have temporarily frozen. My apologies. So yeah, an alt text does not need to be very long, and uh, one thing I've often noticed people do as a mistake is they write as a kind of beginning in the alt text, the beginning of a sentence, they write image of or photo of so and so, photo of a cat, image of a
No,
cat.
don't do
You
that.
really don't need to do that because Um, a screen reader like NVDA, when it encounters an image, says graphic, reads out. Like these are actually the words it always reads out. Graphic. And if there's no alt text, it just says graphic image. Those are the words it,
Graphic image
yeah,
or graphic unlabeled?
yes, those are the actual words that a screen reader user hears. So if you include alt text, all you have to say is a cat, and NVDA will, let's say you're doing it on Twitter or wherever, it'll just say graphic, a cat. And now screen reader users, like, um, you don't you they won't they won't uh, screen reader users won't, or at least unless they are completely new to it, won't look for uh, uh, the fact that you've written the word graphic. They won't think that you've written the word graphic and then the words a cat. It
Yeah, they won't require it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, uh, so yeah, you don't have to write a photo or an image of so and so. You just have to write that. And another thing is, you don't want to include extraneous information um, in the alt text. So, for example,
Yep.
if you're talking about if you're showing an image of an 18th century British architecture house in some remote part of Bengal, you don't want to write built in 1776 by Robert Clive, just randomly saying. Uh, you don't want to write that in the alt text.
No, you
Yeah,
don't.
what was built in 1776 by Robert Clive? A shack, an army barracks. The blind person doesn't know that. Uh, so yeah, you don't want to write that. And if your image is funny, and this is something that
Oh, you cut out there again. Whoops.
hello.
Yeah, you're back.
Oh, sorry, I don't know what the hell is happening. So yes, my apologies again. So as I was saying, another thing you don't want to do, and this is something that that Cambridge University's Disability Office, the Disability Resource Center, explains very well on their website. You don't want to communicate a visual joke in the alt text without first describing the image. So if there's a joke, you don't want to include that in the alt text without describing the image. I can't think of a specific type of example slash or archetype situation where this would arise, but you want to describe the alt text. Yeah, because otherwise, if you include the joke in the alt text, while you just have the visual thing undescribed, the visual image undescribed, that doesn't help the blind person get the joke. In fact, what might happen in many cases is the blind person would ask you, the sighted person who uploaded the image with the alt text, what is what's the point we are attempting to convey here? And uh, what happens is you end up pathologizing in the minds of at least some people that old stereotype that uh, the disabled have no sense of humor even if a joke is handed to them on a plate with watercress around it.
Yeah. The reason we don't have a sense of humor there is because we don't know what the joke is.
Yes,
And so those are some sort of quick tips on writing your alt text. Whatever the tip is, ensure that alt text is there for images, is what I would say. Um, it is absolutely, absolutely necessary and integral, and it can be a decision. It can be the sort of deciding factor between a person being able to complete their project in 2 minutes. I mean, like if all they have to do is actually find the last few images for their project, right?
yes,
A person being able to complete that project in 2 minutes, or actually requiring 2 hours to complete it because they need sighted assistance.
excited help, or having difficulty completing it at all because they may not have access to sighted assistant, because remember, not everyone does.
That's true. That's true. And no amount of Be My Eyes can
Can
actually
help you.
solve that.
And all.
Yeah.
Yes. And another thing which I would say about alt text is, in terms of timing and other factors, let's say, for example, you have a tweet with a link and an image which talk about the same content. For example, I once saw a tweet by a professor at the University of Oxford, a law professor, advertising a course which a master's level course which he was teaching on one of their most famous master's degrees called the BCL. And and he had a link which on in the tweet which gave very granular details about the course, and an image containing text briefly advertising the course. Now, some people might say that, okay, if he had a link to the law.ox.ac.uk website, which is the Oxford University Law Faculty's website, and to the page, to the specific course page on that website, he wouldn't need to include alt text in the image description, because the blind person could just click on the link and see it. But again, this is if he had done that, if he had not put in alt text, which by the way he did, um, he would have been placing what is known as the burden of assimilation on the blind, because the blind person would have to have taken the time to go to the Oxford Law Faculty webpage that he had linked up, um, and then click on the skip to content link on that page. And by the way, on Oxford Law Faculty's website, by the skip to content link doesn't work.
Oh,
Yeah, in fact,
fun.
I've only noticed two Oxford University web pages where the skip to content link does work. So
Oh, wow.
Oxford has to work on that.
If you're watching this, probably do some work on that.
So yeah, by the way, a university which is far below you, Oxford, in the rankings, Queen Mary University of London, which is also in the Russell Group, has 95% of pages with skip to content links which work perfectly. So this is a classic friendship game again.
That,
Anyway, leave that
that
aside.
is rather
So
humorous.
so yeah, leave that aside for a moment. Now, as I said, the blind person would have to do that, would have to go to the link and read the text for herself, while a sighted person would just quickly see it in the relevant portion of it in the image, which was also part of the tweet. So you want to facilitate a method in which the blind person does not have to do extra work if possible.
Exactly. Um, and and that's actually so there are no real getaways, at least from what I can think of, for actually having alt text. You can't really get away with it. It's always required, and
And
it's
yes, and frankly, again, I'll say this to drive this home. If you are the type who is the sort who says that, oh, if the professor had the link and the image in his tweet, but just didn't have the alt text, the blind person could just go and could have just gone and had a look at the link. You are um, a, an armchair troll with a discriminatory mentality. That's it.
completely, and you're gonna have a lot of backlash.
Yes.
So in and in fact, one more thing I want to mention here, just in passing, is actually platforms like Twitter and all, even they're slightly at fault for this lack of spread of awareness for alt text. Why? Because I still don't get why they hide the alt text option in advanced settings of like image, the image under the image on the Android app, for example, or why Instagram hides it under advanced settings, click to expand, and then you have to scroll all the way to the end to actually add alt text. I don't really get that. And so, if anyone from Twitter is watching this, which hopefully you are,
To fix this.
please Please get this fixed. Probably put alt text. Twitter is taking a stride towards this by including a reminder, which actually makes a lot of sense. But it's also probably worth including it closer to the surface where someone doesn't have to go specifically digging for it to actually add alt text.
Yes.
Um,
And one thing I will say about what you said about character limits for alt text in the beginning, as we said, alt text usually does not have to be very long, and the key word there
no.
is usually. Now
Yeah.
there is an issue with limits as well, because Twitter's limit for alt text, for example, is 1,000 characters. I'm not advocating for a system in which there's no alt text limit. I don't think anyone is. But
No. That would be spammy.
yeah, that would be spammy. But I do think that the limit should be increased to deal with certain types of circumstances. Somebody that I follow on Twitter, Pranav, you may have seen me like this individual's tweets quite a lot. Often posts legal images with legal content with alt text of, for example, an extract of a speech that a lawyer made in a court, where and this person focuses on stylistic use of legal language and things like that. This is what the individual's kind of area of research is. So now, in that kind of a circumstance, when he posts on Twitter, he is very focused on alt text as well, because he wants everyone to be able to, everyone who can, or as many people as possible who can, to be able to understand and access his content. Um, when he posts those extracts of speeches, often they are longer than 1,000 characters. So what he has to do is he has to provide the link and the image with a partial alt text description. And if he tries to copy the whole text into the alt text, the whole text of the extract, it partly gets cut off after a point. So the blind person who views his tweet has to go to his website to view the specific extract of the speech that he's of a speech or a judgment, for example, that he is talking about. And here, in in a use case like this, uh, I'm sorry, but it's Twitter, an American-based company regulated by American law, who is putting the burden of assimilation on the blind.
Indeed. Yeah. Completely agree with that because Twitter is requiring this person against his will to include a link to a thing and then require the blind person to actually visit the link. So, I don't know, a solution to this could be Twitter could include a mode where you could specify that, for example, you want to include text in the image. Text, you want to, as all text, you want to actually paste in the text that the image has, for example. Um, and that would increase your character limit. But an easier way is honestly just to increase the character limit to something a little more reasonable, maybe 5,000 characters. I don't know. I'm not going to suggest numbers here because I'm sure there can be some disagreement on that. But the general
Good.
consensus is probably increase the
And it's
limits.
not hard to do.
No, it's one line of code.
Yeah.
I can tell you it's one from after implementing this same feature on my own website for for VD. When it comes to our editor, it's one line of code. um, well, not even one line, to be honest. It's literally just a value you have to change in your code, um, which takes like 2 minutes, and then all the bureaucracy that comes with it. In summary, though, to summarize this entire session, to be honest, there are a few key takeaways. A, digital accessibility is something that you absolutely have to keep in mind because it's gonna net you profits, but it's also very importantly just a thing that in compliance with law or just generally a morally good thing to do. And in accordance with that point, A and Roman numeral 1 is digital accessibility is something that you probably want to start from when your actually project is when your project is starting out. You want to implement it in its core because you don't want to pay extortionate amounts of money when it comes, well, unnecessarily extortionate amounts of money, when it actually comes time to implement it at a later time, because that, as we have seen in the case of that Indian bank, is actually really painful. B, when it comes to, well, A2, to be honest, when it comes to actually spending your money for good of accessibility, probably spend it in places where the efficiency levels uh, will improve. B, if you see somewhere where digital accessibility is probably not being implemented that well, um, you need to call. In fact, we mentioned this in a more general sense in our last video as well. You you can completely feel free, if you feel like, to call it out, to call that particular firm out for their accessibility. Well, I would hesitate to call it malpractice, but I would say inaction in terms of accessibility. Um, and you have got a plethora of ways to do so, including social media, um, and such. C is that digital accessibility awareness needs to spread. It has, it's come a long way since
But quickly,
the last time.
returning to B, as we are the ones talking about digital accessibility, I think a bit of responsibility will have to devolve on us. So, if you, as a blind viewer, feel a bit scared about taking on an organization, especially in India. In the West, it's much easier to do. That's a different matter. But in India, if you feel scared about taking on an organization who is not being whose accessibility compliance, whether it's digital or anything else, is problematic, mm, you are always free to get in touch with one or both of us, uh, and
Indeed.
we will be happy to do the calling out for you. Or if you feel not so much, if you feel like you do want to do it yourself but require a bit of uh, of of uh, of advice, let's say, on how to call out people, or just a pep talk, you are absolutely free to reach out to us. Um, our content, our contact details will, as in our previous video, be in the description box,
In the
uh,
description.
and
Yes.
we will respond to you as soon as we possibly can.
I know that, at least I know that Abhishek, and I can speak for myself as well. We both are quite active on email, and we are actually quite active on Twitter as well. We
Email,
use it as
LinkedIn, Twitter, uh,
email, LinkedIn, Twitter,
WhatsApp.
such platforms, WhatsApp as well. I am completely open to people reaching. In fact, the link to actually reach out to me on WhatsApp, I have a WhatsApp link, like a direct link, is on my channel's about page, and I'll put it. I'll throw it in the description as well, so that
Yes,
you guys can reach out to us.
and you can
Um,
put my number on the WhatsApp, or on the description box, to reach out to me on WhatsApp. I don't think I have a direct link, and my number.
oh no, I can make that for you. To be
Oh,
honest,
you can.
that yeah, yeah, you can make it for any number.
Okay, I don't know that. Yeah, but anyway, even if there's some difficulty in that, it's my UK number itself. I haven't changed my WhatsApp number while I'm in India. So you can reach me on my UK number itself, which we'll put in the description box, or we'll create a link for that. But yes, forgive me. Pranav, continue with your
Oh
takeaways.
no, not at all. That was a very good point. And C, as I was saying, there needs to be, and in fact, this is the final point. There needs to be more awareness in terms of accessibility, and this awareness needs to be spearheaded by a lot of things. Then there needs to be, as in the case of countries like India, awareness spread through government agencies. Well, government agencies have more accessibility problems to deal with at the moment as well. Uh,
And
but
issues.
yes.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
there needs to be more awareness spread there, and through companies that themselves are actually making strides in terms of accessibility. Twitter is one, for all its for all that we've called out Twitter for right now. It is worth mentioning that Twitter has taken accessibility into account on multiple occasions. um,
Yes,
met
for those who are slightly confused, we are calling out Twitter while praising it at the same time, or how I uh, called out, let's say, my university's laundry provider, Circuit Laundry, while at the same time praising it. Um, I think we can easily make a distinction for your slightly confused viewers, or at least those viewers who might be slightly confused, between what we could call first world and third world problems. Now, in
Right.
India, with a bank like HDFC, which has visual captures as the only way of logging in, or ICICI, where you have to do uh, a logic game with your card, which you have to see to make an online bank transfer. Uh, those are third world problems. Um, while with Twitter, where you already have a facility to make things accessible, or with Barclays, for example, where you have to type in where to make a bank transfer. Without getting into the specifics, you have to type in a combination of codes from your some of which display your on your phone into your computer, and some of which display on your computer into your phone. In a Barclays situation, you could talk about uh, how, instead of making you do that process in 120 seconds, which is the time limit they have, they could increase that limit to 240 seconds. That's a first world problem, while this is a third world, while HDFC is a third world problem. So, in fact, I'm not sure that the Barclays 120-second thing is even a problem at all. So,
No.
yeah, so let's understand that hopefully what I've explained has helped you understand what I think of as the first world versus third world distinction. And hopefully that uh, helps you think a little more coherently about accessibility more generally, whether it's digital or in other ways.
Indeed. And the final thing that I want to mention as a force that can help spread awareness about digital accessibility is actually education sectors. And in fact, I've mentioned this in other areas, so I won't go into too much detail in this. I have talked about it extensively in other interviews that I've done, but it involves the in the learning of accessibility at, well, dare I say, even a high school level, for example, because as computer science courses at the high school level, for example, are getting increasingly good, um, and they're really improving in quality, and they're actually many of the driving factors that push people into this industry. um, you'd want people to know about accessibility from that time, because once it's ingrained into their head from then, they can apply it to multiple projects later on in life. It's much easier to do so than if you were to learn it, say at the age of, I don't know, 30 or something, when you've already been in the force and you've had a workflow that you've already started to work with. So these are sort of the things that I think that can make an impact on spreading the awareness of accessibility. Abhishek, do you have anything to add there, maybe?
Two things. One, if you want to know more about the digital accessibility landscape and situation in India, at least, you should. There's an organization which is increasingly becoming a force for digital accessibility advocacy in India, which is called Mission Accessibility.
Yep.
It is run by one Rahul Bajaj, the first blind Indian to get the Rhodes Scholarship, which is a prestigious scholarship that allows you to study at the University of Oxford for 2 years. Rahul Bajaj is also a lawyer, and I would highly suggest following this organization he runs called Mission Accessibility. If you want to know about Mission Accessibility, so that was uh, kind of a one subpart A to my first point. Subpart B is, if you want to know more about digital accessibility uh, more generally, um, in terms of things like audio described content or various other things, there are loads of good resources which you can look up. For example, you can follow the um, UK Audio Description Association on Twitter. And if you want to know specifically about audio description in sport, in Britain specifically, uh, the website levelplayingfield.org.uk. the English words level playing field, all written as one word, .org.uk is a good website to know about audio description in cricket and in football. Now, my second point is, if you want to understand more about, and my second and final point, I promise, is if you want to know more about the benefits of accessibility more generally, there is an excellent article which, if you ask your any lawyer friends you may have to look up on a database called Westlaw, which I cannot recommend highly enough. It's about the third party benefits of accessibility. Third parties, as in sighted people who are using a product which is accessible for the blind. So the third party benefits of accessibility by Elizabeth Evans, which talks about not which talks about accessibility in multiple ways, not just disability. For example, accessibility in the gender context of making work policies which permit flexible working hours for women with child caring responsibilities. So if you read Elizabeth Evans's article, and if you read up more on things like judicial diversity and about the Crime and Courts Act 2013 in the UK, you will understand how, or specifically about the criticisms of the Crime and Courts Act 2013, you will understand more about how the concepts we have been talking about apply more broadly than even in the context of disability to other protected characteristics, as we call them in the law, uh, such as gender or religion or any other protected characteristic that you can think of.
Right, right. Some very useful points actually, and in fact, I'll link these in the description. Um, all right, so that brings us to the end of this session. In fact, it's been very productive, and
So
I hope you guys got something out of it.
I hope so too.
Thank you for watching, and you can get in touch with us in the description. Oh, well, from the contact details linked in the description.
We'd love to hear
Um,
your thoughts, feedback, and any suggestions you may have for us, either through the comments on YouTube, or if you want to email us directly, or email or message us directly using social media platforms. You're more than welcome to do so with those.
Indeed, indeed. All right, we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.
Until then, goodbye.